Good morning and welcome back to another virtual edition of Children's Church. Today, we have a ton of things to learn about because we're really doing 3 stories. We have a story about friendship, a beautiful, beautiful friendship. We have a story about mortal enemies. And we also have a beautiful love story that goes back to the mortal enemies and some battles and all that kind of stuff. So it's going to be a good day. It's going to be a pretty packed day. So I hope you're ready for it. Have you ever had a good friend? Like a really good friend? When I first started coming here to Grace Church, I was in 4th grade going into 5th grade. It was during that summer. And I met a guy named Matt Kessler. And pretty quickly on, like that first day that we met each other, we just kind of knew that we were going to be friends. I don't know how we knew that, but we just knew we would. Now, Matt Kessler, some things you should know about him. He loved to play video games. And he was great at sports, loved playing sports. Something you should know about me. I was never a huge fan of video games, a lot of video games anyways, and I'm terrible at sports. So how in the world were we supposed to be good friends? Well, Matt, he was an incredible guy that realized that I didn't like to do those things, so instead he found other things that we both enjoyed, like playing different board games like Risk, or even sometimes, shooting some basketballs and that kind of stuff, watching Lord of the Rings, listening to music. There were all these other things that we enjoyed doing together, and we bonded over those things, and we became best friends. It was great. Matt was a great friend to me. Now, David, who our story is about today, he had an incredible friend as well. And we're going to learn about him right now. We are starting in 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 1. And I am upside down. There we go. As soon as David had finished speaking to King Saul, the soul of Jonathan was King Saul's son, the soul of Jonathan was knit together with David. And Jonathan loved David as his own soul. And King Saul took David that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant or a promise with David because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. And David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him, so that Saul set him over the men of war. And this was good in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servant. All right, let's break this down. Jonathan and David were best friends. And can you imagine if your best friend got to stay at your house every night, like a sleepover that never ended? Well, that's what happened. David, he was invited to come live with King Saul and King Saul's son, Jonathan, and his other children and all that kind of good stuff. And so Jonathan and David, they just grew closer and closer. It was like they were one person, like they were the same person. They were just so close. They probably finished each other's
sandwiches.
That's what I was gonna say.
That's right. We just went there. Unlike Prince Han, Jonathan did not betray David. Jonathan loved David. And Jonathan, he quickly realized as he saw what God was doing in David's life, that David had something special going for him. That God wanted to use David in a special way. Maybe he even had some sort of sense, or he learned from David, that he was chosen by God to be Israel's next king. But Jonathan was King Saul's firstborn son, which means that Jonathan should be the next person to be king. But Jonathan, he didn't want to be king if David was supposed to be king. He saw how God was working in David's life, and he was willing to give up his crown, to give up his inheritance, to give up everything that was coming his way and all the power and the authority and the money and riches and respect of the people. Jonathan was willing to give all of that up because he loved God and he loved David. And Jonathan, he actually gave him his robe, like his royal robe. He gave David his armor, his things for battle. And he said to David, you go, you take these things, because God, he has chosen you and he's using you. And who am I to get in the way of that? What an incredible friend. Jonathan was not angry or jealous at David. He should have been, right? I mean, David was going to take away the throne from him when he was supposed to be the next king. But Jonathan, he loved David. He loved God. And he was willing to do even those really tough things because of his great love for them. This video was brought to you by the letter C for curveball. Because man, this story is about to take a huge twist. And so we have Jonathan, King Saul's son. And Jonathan loves David. He is a great friend to David. And he's super excited about all these cool things that God has been doing in David's life to bring salvation to Israel. I mean, David literally saved the people from Goliath, that giant guy, right? And so Jonathan, he's just happy to be a part of David's life and to be able to witness or to look at all these crazy, incredible things that God is doing through David. Jonathan isn't jealous of David. He's just happy for him. He's a great friend, the best friend that David could have ever asked for. But Jonathan's father, King Saul, he starts to see and hear everyone being excited and happy about David and being impressed by David. And King Saul, he does not react the same way that Jonathan does. When the men from Israel had returned from the war against the Philistines, where David killed Goliath, well, the women, they all go out into the streets and they're cheering and rejoicing, and they have throw this parade and whatnot. And some of the women start singing this song. And it says that Saul has killed his thousands and David his tens of thousands. Well, King Saul, he was not exactly happy that they were impressed with David. He was not happy at all. King Saul was very angry. And this saying, the one where they would say that Saul has struck down his thousands and David his 10,000s, it displeased Saul. It did not make him happy. And he said, they've ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me, they have ascribed thousands. And what more can he have but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day on. He was like, David, he might try to become king. He might try to take my kingdom away from me. And actually, God had already determined that David was going to be taking the kingdom away from Saul. So he was kind of right. He wasn't totally crazy. But David wasn't trying to do anything here. It would just be God that would be doing this work. And we're going to make that very clear later on in future stories. But anyways, so King Saul, after this, he was not trusting of David. He was very suspicious of David and thought that he might try to steal the kingdom away from Saul. And so he got angry. And as a matter of fact, God sent this harmful spirit to Saul, and he was just enraged. So there was one day when David, he was playing the lyre. Remember that harp instrument that we learned about before? And he would play that for King Saul to try to calm him down. Well, King Saul, he did not get calmed down. And King Saul grabbed a spear and he threw it at David to try to spear David to the wall and kill him. He didn't just do it once, he did it twice. But David escaped both times. Whew, that was close. Well, King Saul, he realized that he wasn't going to be able to kill him very effectively, and he knew that God was with David and God was no longer with him. So he got a new idea. He decided to make David the commander of a big army and sent David out to war. Maybe some enemy would kill him. Well, that didn't work either. So, things are not very great with King Saul and David. Jonathan and David, they are doing phenomenally, just A+, everything's wonderful. King Saul and David, King Saul is literally trying to murder him. Literally. Yeah. As David was faced with these super scary situations, he would sing songs, worship songs, to remind him that God would be faithful, that God cared for him and loved him, and he would walk with him no matter what happened. You know this one? Sing along. I know the night won't last. Your word will come to pass. heart will sing your praise again. Jesus, you're still enough. Keep me within your love. My heart will sing your praise again. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness. Your faithfulness. Still in your hands. This is my confidence. Never fail. Promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness. Your faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. Never fail me yet. Here we go. I've seen you move the mountains. I believe I see you do it again. You made a way where there was no way, and I believe I see you do it again. I've seen you move the mountains, and I believe I see you do it again. You made a way where there was no way, and I believe I see you do it again. Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness. Your faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You never fail. Promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness. Your faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. Never fail me yet. Never fail me yet. And I never will forget that you never failed me yet. And you never will. Today's video was brought to you by the letter C for crazy and in love, because this is about to be one crazy love story. Now, things are already pretty crazy and complicated when it comes to David and King Saul and his family. I mean, you have King Saul who's like trying to murder David, and then you have his son Jonathan who is like best of friends with David and just like super excited anytime he's around. And then David's living at their house, but King Saul again is trying to murder him. So then King Saul kind of sends him out into the army thing, and it's just, there's a lot going on. But things get even weirder because Jonathan, he has a sister. Well, he has a few sisters, but there's one sister named Michael. I know Michael is kind of a guy's name now, but his sister's name is Michael. Get over it. And Michael, kind of like Jonathan, she was a big fan of David. But she really likes David. Like, really, really likes David.
Together we shall explore the heights of delight.
If you know what I mean. And so King Saul, he's like, it seems that my daughter fancies you there, David. So if you want to, you could marry Michael, my daughter. That's fine. You could have her. But under one little condition. You need to go out and, let's see, kill 100 Philistines. Yeah, if you do that, then you can have my daughter. Now, did King Saul really want David to marry his daughter? Or was this just another scheme of King Saul's to try to get David killed? Not really sure, but let's see what happens. We are in 1 Samuel chapter 18, starting at verse 20. And if at any point the story gets too intense, just look at the cute puppies. It'll make everything better. All right. Now, King Saul's daughter, Michal, loved David. And they told Saul. And the thing pleased him. And Saul thought, let me give her to him, that she may be a snare or a trap or a distraction to him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. So it looks like King Saul really did just want to kill David more so than have him be a part of his family, but yeah, David doesn't know that right now. So he says to David, you shall now be my son-in-law, a part of my family. And Saul commanded his servants, speak to David in private and say, behold, the king has delight in you, and all his servants love you. Now then, become the king's son-in-law. And Saul's servant spoke those words in the ears of David, and David said, does it seem to you a little thing to become the king's son-in-law? David is beside himself. How in the world would King Saul want David to be a part of his family, to marry into his family? He's like, what an honor that would be. Are you sure, Saul, that you really want me to be a part of your family? And in that verse 24 or 23, he says, like, why would you want me to be a part of the family since I am a poor man and I have no reputation? He's like, I don't compare. I don't have some like royal family. I don't have riches or wealth. Like, why are you bringing me to the table? Why are you including me in this family? Then Saul said, verse 25, thus shall you say to David, the king desires no bride price, except I want you to kill 100 Philistines. He tells David that in order to marry his daughter who loves him, he has to kill 100 Philistines. This sounds more of King Saul doing the same old just to try to get David killed, if you're asking me, honestly. Well, David arose and went along with his men, and he didn't kill just 100, but he killed 200 Philistines. And when he came back to the king, King Saul, well, he didn't really have much of a choice. So Saul gave him his daughter, Michal, for a wife. But when Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him, Saul was even more afraid of David. So Saul was David's enemy continually. Well, that is our story, or stories, for today. You have Jonathan, who is a great friend to David, loves him, and is just super excited about all these cool things that God is doing in David's life. And he doesn't get jealous of David. He's just excited to be a part of whatever it is that God's doing. And then you have Michal, Jonathan's sister, who is in love with David. And sure enough, they get married, which is really exciting, right? And cool, except it's kind of a weird story and how it all goes down, but that's pretty amazing, I guess. And then you have King Saul, and King Saul is angry. He's jealous. He is ready to get vengeance on David, even though David has done nothing wrong. Really, Saul is angry at God probably more than anything, because God has really left Saul and he's clearly with David, and he is not happy about that one bit. So he tries to murder him himself by throwing spears at him. He tries to send him off to wars to get him killed that way. And no matter what Saul does, David, he can't be touched. Like, God is with him, and God's not letting anything happen to him, no matter what King Saul tries to scheme up. And again, David, he is following after God. He's trying to do the right thing. He is just kind of along for the ride, and he's not trying to make King Saul angry at him. He's not trying to take his throne away, though he's kind of been promised the throne already, but he's not trying to take over his kingdom. David is just trying to follow God and do the right thing. But King Saul, he just can't see things that way at all. You know, honestly, one thing that this story really reminds me of is the fact that Jesus, when he came to earth, he had a lot of enemies, even though he did all the right things. And ultimately, Satan, he wanted to take Jesus down, and God himself in the flesh, let's get him killed. And he was kind of successful because Jesus was killed. He was murdered on a cross. But Death had no power over him, and he was God himself, and he raised back from the dead, and he came to life, and he defeated sin and death and all of these terrible things so that we could have life. We could have freedom. We could have forgiveness. So even though Satan thought he was going to be ruining Jesus and ruining God's day and all that kind of stuff, God, he was in control, and he still did what he came to do, and Satan, he couldn't do anything about it. So sorry, King Saul, for kind of comparing you to Satan. That's probably not the nicest thing in the world. But now that I think of it, King Saul actually kind of reminds me of me, if I'm being honest, because I can get jealous sometimes. And when I feel threatened, like somebody's going to take something away from me that I really want or I really enjoy or I really love, then I might kind of lose my mind too and get really angry and jealous and do things that I shouldn't be doing in order to try to keep whatever it is that I want. If you know what I mean. Like, if you have a toy that you love and you get the suspicion that your brother, your sister, or your friend is going to come and take the toy away, then you might get really angry at them and, take things in your own hands and not let them play with the toy just in case they might possibly steal it away from you or something like that. We do that kind of thing too. And we can't be doing that. We need to trust God, trust that he's in control, and trust that even when things look scary, that he's still going to take care of us. That's an important takeaway too. Well, hopefully you learned something, and I hope that you have a wonderful week, and I hope that you love God and trust God this week, even when you're faced with scary things, all right? I'll see you next time.